The announcement of the next expansion for World of Warcraft looms large on the horizon at this year's Blizzcon, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of hype and speculation of what it'll be. The Emerald Dream, islands on the other side of Azeroth, the list goes on. I did read about the fact that Blizzard registered Mist of Pandaria as a trademark, but my gut feeling is that that's a red herring that Blizzard is throwing out, since they know fans can keep track of what they do with trademarks. But then again, who knows? It could be the real thing. In any case, I'm about to throw my speculative 2 cents in too, in particular about what the next hero class is going to be. Most people have been talking about a monk, a mage hunter, or a demon hunter, but I have a guess that's different from what most people are saying. It'll be coming out of left field for anyone who hasn't played Warcraft 3, but, well, here's my guess. My guess is that the new class will be the Sea Witch. Hear me out on this one. In the expansion pack to Warcraft 3, there were some neutral heroes that you could hire in multiplayer at a tavern, and one of these neutral heroes was the Naga Sea Witch. Sea Witches were something of a combination of a mage and an archer, using a bow to attack at range and also having a few attack spells. And since our last hero class was a melee class, the next hero class should probably be ranged, and the Sea Witch certainly fits the bill. In fact, when you stop and think about it, there's styles in the Sea Witch class for both ranged weapon and spell damage, so it's actually one of the best ways to go when it comes to adding a ranged hero. Also, it's high time we had another healing class, and it would be easy enough to add a restoration spec to a Sea Witch class. It may sound a little bit out of place, but keep in mind, Shaman for Warcraft 3 were an offensive spellcaster with no heals to speak of, and yet they're currently one of WoW's healing classes. If they can give heals to a Shaman, they can give them to Sea Witches. Another reason why Sea Witches fit. Naga have been making their presence felt since WoW launched, and there have been hints dropped here and there on the website that something is stirring beneath the sea. And with the Vashir quests, that something has been revealed to be the Naga. And Ashura, the queen of the Night Elves from 10,000 years ago who tried to summon the Burning Legion to Azeroth, was turned into a Naga along with many of her followers, and she now rules the Naga forces as their queen. In a lot of ways, she's done more damage to Azeroth than Deathwing did. Deathwing cracked the ground and made a few tsunamis. Ashura, on the other hand, broke a continent into 3 pieces. The Eastern Kingdoms, Kalimdor and Northrend, were all once one big continent, with a big mystical lake in the middle called the Well of Eternity. And after Ashura's ritual to summon the Burning Legion was botched, the one big continent was broken apart and the Well of Eternity turned into the Maelstrom. So Ashura is pretty badass, and considering that she and Deathwing are working for the old gods, it would make sense for Ashura to be the next main antagonist for the next WoW expansion. The reason I'm bringing this up? One of the things that made Wrath such a good expansion was the fact that the Death Knight made sense in terms of the lore with the Lich King as the main antagonist, and the Sea Witch makes sense in terms of lore with Ashura as the main antagonist. And it's not very difficult to explain how Sea Witches could join the Alliance or the Horde. When you consider how self-centered Ashura was in the lore, it makes sense that some Naga would get pissed enough at her to say, screw this, we're going to ditch her and team up with the 2 most powerful factions on Azeroth, the Horde and the Alliance, and teach them how she does what she does. Another thing that makes the Sea Witch fit? The next profession is probably going to be woodworking, which would make staffs and bows, which are the sorts of weapons a caster and archer hybrid would be able to use, so it fits in perfectly with Sea Witches as the hero class again. Woodworking would fit even more nicely if it used leather as a raw material, since mining and herbalism each got a new crafting profession to go with them in the Burning Crusade and Wrath. It's time for skinning to get some help. When you put all these pieces together, the next lore-logical main antagonist, the requirements for the next hero class, and how well it would fit in with a new profession, it all fits together just a little bit too well. Now, Blizzard, if I've just stolen your thunder, please don't be mad at me for it. My viewers probably don't believe me anyway. I'd like to say that I've been trying this and that to make up for the Does Blizzard Really Hate Paladin series since Blizzard finally cleaned up their act in Wrath of the Lich King, even if Blizzard did deserve it at the time. And personally, I'm interested in what a Sea Witch might be able to use for a new and novel resource mechanic. Don't get me wrong, it's very reasonable that Sea Witches could use mana. I can see, say, a marksmanship build Sea Witch having some retribution or enhancement style mana regeneration mechanics to keep a small mana bar going up and down. But personally, I'd like to see a new resource, kind of like runes for Death Knights. Now before I reveal what I have in mind, I'd like to recap the resources we've seen so far. There's Rage, which is a bar that goes up as you deal and take damage. There's energy and focus, which are bars that go up continuously and sometimes depend on which abilities you use. There's mana, which is again a bar, which usually only goes down unless you pop some restore abilities unless you're a healer. Then there's runes, which are finally not a bar. There are a few distinct cells that fill up over time and complement a rage-like resource, runic power, which is again a bar. What we haven't seen is a lot of little cells, say 20 or a dozen or so, that sit where a bar would be, each fill up over time, and which your abilities can cost several of apiece. I'd like to see a resource like that, lots of little cells, played with, and even now I'm frantically programming a simulator that can simulate a resource mechanic like what I've described. And for sea witches, this resource mechanic with lots of little cells would be pearls. I'm hoping that the Pearl simulator I'm building right now will help Blizzard figure out what's feasible in terms of how fast these resources regenerate and what new abilities work well with them. I've also thrown in a sort of a new concept with these resources that makes them much more dynamic, but potentially more complex than they need to be. Pearls of different colors. Imagine a system like this. Let's say you're a marksmanship sea witch, and let's say Wave Shot is your basic shot ability. You use it, but when you spend a pearl to cast Wave Shot, that pearl turns red. And when that pearl finally refreshes and is ready to use again, the next marksmanship ability that you spend the red pearl on will do additional damage, but then again, spending a red pearl turns it back into a white pearl, and that pearl is still going to take time to refresh. Now there's lots of different applications for different colored pearls. Even if Blizzard isn't doing the Sea Witch for the next hero class, or doesn't want to try pearls for a resource mechanic. There's still other uses for the simulator if that's the case. For instance, let's say that the maximum number of pearls is set to 5, and I add Crusader Strike as an ability that consumes a white pearl and turns it into a fresh red pearl. Then I also add Templar's Verdict as an ability that consumes only red pearls and deals different amounts of damage based on how many red pearls it consumes. That would be a perfect way to simulate how a Retribution Paladin would work if they had a maximum of 5 holy power instead of 3. And yes, I am programming this kind of flexibility into the simulator. Eventually, I hope to have a Pearl simulator to the point where it can read in an XML file that players write, and that XML file details spells and other rules, like how quickly pearls regenerate and what color pearls there are, and then the simulator shows exactly how playing such a spec would work. But I'm not nearly there yet. So far, all I have in the simulator is a few buttons, the pearl bar at the top with different colored pearls, and some damage displays. It's also worth noting here for legal tard-proofing purposes that Blizzard has my express written permission to use any ideas that are in this video or in the Pearl simulator when it comes out in any way they like. Anyhow, I'll post another video once I get the Pearl simulator working, explaining where to download it and how the XML files work. And yes, the source code for the simulator will be available. I doubt that the Pearl simulator will be pretty to look at when it's done, but I hope that it will at least be useful for players and developers to play around with.